Hi everyone. Today we're going to have a great guest to talk about let's normalizing third-party reproduction by adding it to the medical intake. We're going to be talking to Alexis here, and she is an attorney and she specializes in family law. And she has done so much work legislatively and with surrogacy in New York State, and also has some really wonderful information to share with us on reproductive health and fertility. So she should be on in just a minute. We're having a little bit of a challenge with the last one, so let me just see. Here she is. Okay, let's get her on right now. I'm just going to put on my glasses. Okay, on here and make sure she can get on. Okay. Alexis, are you on?
Hi,
Oh, good, good. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I'm like, wait, where is she?
I hear you. I hear you, but what's happening? Hi, thank you so much for having
Oh, thank you for being on. This is so exciting because I was so thrilled when I got to meet you at um, at the event that actually you hosted to celebrate surrogacy law being passed in New York State. And I know that you were so involved with that, and so I really thank you for that very much. And then we got to chat, and you've done so many wonderful things in the field, and there's so much to talk about with it. So we talked about this initiative, and I'm just so glad that you were able to come on.
Thank you so much. I believe in it. I mean, everything that you and I have talked about is a mutual passion for both of us, right? And we have a shared mission. So I'm so glad to team up with you.
No, thank you so much. I started to tell people a little bit about you. And so maybe you just want to kind of fill in the blanks because I was just saying that you specialize in family law and in divorce. And there's so much that people don't think about when it comes to fertility when they're going through a divorce if they've been on fertility journey, which is very stressful and can impact marriages greatly.
Absolutely. When I first started as a family attorney, I was normally a commercial litigator, not the happiest of lawyers, but that's what I was, and so I wanted to get into family law after I had my own journey with fertility issues and parenthood, and we can talk about that later. But in New York State at the time, there were really only two areas of family law practice in New York, and that was adoption and matrimonial, which is euphemism for divorce law, really. And so I chose to get into the matrimonial world, and people wondered why, because really I wanted eventually to do surrogacy law and all things fertility, donor arrangements, etc. Um, but I saw so much of an overlap there, and I knew that the law was going to be changing. I participated in trying to get it changed, but mostly it was about educating others in the legal profession about you can't see any component of family law in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
You really can't. You really can. I think there's a statistic like 1 in 3 couples who experience infertility or any kind of fertility treatments are either in a divorce or in a separation or something. It really increases the strain on a marriage. And
Yeah, and I think lots of times people don't think about that. We think about the physical impact on the person who's carrying, we think about the emotional impact, but as a couple, and I do a lot of work with couples, it impacts both people. And sometimes, one of the partners feels as if the other partner isn't sometimes on the same page or understanding what they're going through. And it's a financial, physical, and emotional toll on each individual. And it's challenging. It's very hard. So recognizing it is great. And I think once, if they're able to recognize and work on it, it's wonderful. And if unfortunately there's been other issues going on and they wind up having to go for a divorce, there are so many things to consider.
absolutely. And you and I have talked about this before too, but there's whenever intake meeting a potential matrimonial client for the first time, you have your intake form. We also have, which is a standardized in New York, a net worth statement, right? Which is essentially a big long document where you fill out what are the family expenses, what are the assets, and what are the liabilities. Um,
Right.
but nobody ever thinks to say, and I'm trying to get that as to be part of the discussion, which is part of your mission about normalizing third-party reproduction, right? Ask about stored genetic material. Do you have frozen embryos? Do you have frozen eggs? Do you have frozen sperm? Because these issues will come up. They're way more prevalent than people think.
Yeah.
And, you know, we started toying with the idea of putting Bitcoin on there, right? So why not embryos? That's,
You know, it's so interesting because we toy with the idea of so many different things and we change so many things. But when it comes to fertility, we're a little bit shy, or we're a little bit not as what would be the right word, aggressive, or maybe proactive in adding that. And we've heard on the news, or people who follow any of the celebrities and they get divorced, we hear that sometimes there's frozen embryos, and there are discussions about it. So it's such an important piece of this puzzle when it comes to divorce. So I love the fact that you're trying to get all of your colleagues on board and adding this onto part of the asset sheet, because that's what it is.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, no matter how it's classified, because you know, you list children on there too. No matter how it's classified, I think the main point is make it part of just the routine, so that it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable question or discussion that you put off until the end. It's just normalized. It's part of your regular intake, and you know, that I think will go a long way making everybody comfortable discussing it and addressing those things.
Right. And that's what happens, I think, when we put something on an intake or we're comfortable talking about it, then the other person takes the stigma out of it.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it might not be something that a couple thinks about when they're going for divorce.
I can't tell you how many times, you know, when that issue comes up, one or both say, "Oh yeah, I think we have it." Like maybe a few years ago, we froze them, and I think we filled out some forms what we were going to do in the event one of us died, in the event one of us were, and it's like, well, that's kind of important, right? So that's part of gathering your tax returns, gathering your bank statements, get those forms. Those are things that you've signed. Those things indicate what your intent was at the time about stored genetic material, and it's going to be relevant now.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad that you're doing that. And that goes along absolutely with the initiative that we're working on in trying to get it part of the conversation when it comes to third party reproduction and adoption. And adoption doesn't necessarily apply with the legal ramifications in terms of what we're talking about specifically now, but it does apply to open up the conversation about it on the medical intake form, because everybody should just be comfortable. And I think the fact that you're doing this helps to take the stigma away. It just helps people feel comfortable with, oh, we have this, now what are we going to do with it, and
Yeah.
avoid so much turmoil down the road.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, you know, I as not just an attorney practicing this, but like I said, I lived through this. I had both my surrogacy, and it was 2012 or 11 was the first pregnancy, and so people weren't talking about it as much. It was not legal anymore. And every time I would call OB's office, which was in Pennsylvania, because I wanted to get information from the doctor, and there were HIPAA waivers on file. Everything was cleared. I was allowed to speak to them. I got put through the ringer. Question. What's your relationship to the patient again? What's your relationship to the patient? And if there were regular forms filled out at the very beginning of the pregnancy, this is a surrogate pregnancy, you know, I think it would have, it was an additional strain that needed when you're already in it.
No, it's true. And when, I went to an OB's office, and they said that they don't even ask the questions. When somebody presents there and they're pregnant, they go ahead and treat that woman. They don't ask how the baby was conceived, or if it's even their baby, if they're, carrying it for somebody else. And I was very taken back when I heard that, because it seemed to me like if any place it should be asked, it should be asked by an OB who's delivering that child.
That's right. I mean, what about wristbands, right? In the hospital,
Right.
you don't want to be in a room with your baby who's about to be born, and they're like, who do we have? Right? It's just, it doesn't make sense given the technology and how the numbers of people who experience this and go through this, and the reality for so many people, it doesn't make sense that as the law hadn't kept pace until recently, that just practice, right?
Right.
Best practice standards need to keep pace with
So
technology.
what happens? I didn't really ask you this question, but I know you know the answer. What
Oh, no.
happens? No, I'm pretty sure. What happens then when somebody has a baby through a surrogate and the baby is born and the hospital knows now that it is a surrogacy pregnant, surrogate has carried the child. Legally, who is the parent?
So I have to say, just because this is how lawyers do it, right? It depends. So it depends really on what's happened up to that point, what state you're in, if there was a pre-birth or ordained. But in New York, for example, and with our new law, which is really, really the gold standard and modeled after what we're striving for uniformly, you would obtain ideally a birth judgment of parentage, which essentially says that on the birth of the baby, that instant, the intended parents are the legal parents with all attendant rights and responsibilities, and conversely, the surrogate, and if she married her spouse, are not, which is really powerful, right? It's really powerful.
Yeah, I get the chills a little bit when you're saying it.
Right. It's so true. And that means, you got to do everything that you would have had to do if you were giving birth yourself. You got to line up newborn insurance, like all of that. You are on the hook from that second. I mean, and it's a welcome burden, of course, but that is how it works. Now,
Right.
states and depending on if what steps people have taken or not taken, it may be that you need to get a post-birth judgment of parentage, but you can still go on the birth certificate. But that's, the best approach would be, like I said, from the second baby's born.
Mhm. And so, as the parent, as the intended parent, you really need to find out what the law is where you're carrying, basically, or where the child is being delivered, to see if there are any specific legal um, laws that you have to follow in order to be sure that the
Right.
child is on paper legally, legally yours on that birth certificate.
That's
Which
right.
is such an interesting conversation to even have, but it's true and it's important. It's important for people to know this. So a lot of it comes down to how do we start the conversation and how do we make sure that the powers that be know that we need to have the medical community and the legal community educate and inform by putting it on paper, forcing the conversation. So
Right.
to me, the point of putting this stuff on a form is to force the conversation. It's not just to gain the information which we want, but it's to also force the conversation to take place.
And when we say force, I mean, it sounds like it's something negative,
It
right?
sounds so horrible when I say
Right.
that.
More like just probe it. It's just probe it. Make it normal.
Yeah.
Make it part of somebody's family history. Make it part, your birth story can be part of your family history. They make children's books now for donor conceived children. They make children's books now for, children.
Well, yeah, and it is part of the birth story, and we are required to put so much information down, and that some of it we don't know when we fill out forms or we fill out medical information or we fill out forms for a lawyer, but it makes you think, and it opens up your eyes to other things, and it also allows the person who has been born this way to feel comfortable.
Yeah, right. That's
And that's so essential that they feel comfortable with their birth story.
it's so true.
Yeah. And things have changed so much. I mean, you had two children this way. Oh my goodness. The changes, I mean, you have to be a busy mom.
Yeah, I am. But well, that was it was just part of what kind of motivated me to change gears professionally too. It wasn't so much, it was this too, that, experiencing it on the client side made me want to do it on the professional side, but also just how backwards it felt that I live in New York and I couldn't do that in my home state. So it
Yeah.
was very important to me to be involved in the legislative efforts and the advocacy efforts to get it. And it's just now brand new. So, we're excited to be able to do it here and to have women who want to do it here be able to act as surrogates and have intended parents who want to stay in their home state do it here. is great. It's just,
Yeah.
it's new, but it's great.
I agree with you, and it is new, and there's like little learning curves, I suppose, with it being new. But I've had worked with people who have traveled, throughout the United States for this, and I've worked with people from other countries who come here because at least our country allows surrogacy, and then they have to go out of state as well.
Right. Look, I'm from Boston originally. Okay, so I am a New England Patriots fan. However, we were born in Pittsburgh, so I allowed my son to get a Steelers onesie. At the time we spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh. But again, that's part of his story, right? That's part of his.
Yes. And it's an important part of his story because what happens, I think, with some, and please tell me what you think, but what I think on this is some of the birth stories are obvious and some of them are not. So surrogacy is one that is obvious because you're the intended parent and you're expecting, but nobody necessarily has to know you're expecting until you decide to share that information.
Right.
Adoption also, you're the intended parent and you're expecting, but nobody knows until the child arrives. And both times it's obvious because people know that you're not carrying. When it comes to donor conception, it's a little different. And it's different for the LGBTQ plus community than it is for the heterosexual community.
Oh.
So there's so many different layers to this. And from a legal perspective, I think there's so many different ways to look at this. I'm just wondering if you break down the categories at all, or would it just be that regardless, if this is something that you have, we need to list it and we need to know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I keep coming back to our new law in New York, but I think of all things, the ART, reproductive technology and law, in terms of this new statute that we have, because it's really so comprehensive and well thought out. The whole concept behind it.
I was going to say, well, look at the team who was on it. I mean, it was a fabulous team of people who worked on it. So thank you.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it was an incredibly impressive team of people who worked on it. And there was a lot of pushback from certain people and certain organizations on it, which was interesting. People that you didn't think would push back on it did.
Very true. But I'll get to tell you, the product is amazing. And the baseline of the entire statute is that we shift our thinking, right? So traditional thought about parentage, legal parentage, is genetic connection, gestation, the act of giving birth, right? The marital presumption. Well, now we say who intended and consented to be a parent. And I think that I know, shivers, right? And you have to just retrain your brain in your brain. And when you start to retrain your brain to think about things in different terms, it becomes natural. So that's what we want. We want the discussion to be natural. You can, in our law, you could be a single intended parent. You could be intimate partners. You could be married. You could be gay. You could be straight. It doesn't matter, because the point is, it all comes down to, do you intend to be a parent?
And the part that's so profound is that there are so many people that are touched by infertility. So 1 in 8, I read a statistic, and I have this actually on the petition that we put out. If anybody wants to sign the petition, you can find it on the my bio linked. We have it on there that 30 to 60,000 sperm donations are made in a year. I mean, that's voluminous. It really is. So when we think of the numbers, adoption, I think I can't remember the statistic now, but it's, I think 1%, I'm so sorry, I'm trying to quote a statistic and I don't remember it. My only excuse is I started talking it.
It's a lot. It's okay.
Yeah, 1% maybe. It's a huge proportion of our society. So everybody is touched by this in one way or another. So there's no reason to keep it a secret. There's no reason to feel shame in it. There's no reason not to be able to talk about it.
Right. And you asked before, what do we as professionals, what can we do?
Yes.
Take the medical, and the great thing about people who are in our world, our industry, right, is that it's interdisciplinary, and we support each other. So I just came to the ASRM conference. And, there are legal workshops, there are mental health workshops, there are medical workshops, and you see professionals from each of different disciplines, attending the other panels. You and I, right? We don't do the same thing, but we see the same population, and we're part of a team, professional team that people need. And so I think that's key, right? Keep collaborating with other disciplines and other view it from a different perspective. Look at it from the physician's perspective. Look at it from the mental health perspective, the legal, and put it all together to say we need to unify.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree with you. I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday, actually, about the initiative I'm working on. And what I have been trying to do is now bring this out into non-fertility world. So to bring it out to cardiologists,
Yeah.
endocrinologists, you know, the AMA in general, because these issues touch people after birth and through life, throughout life. And we want to make sure that their birth story is carried through their life, not just in the beginning of telling them about it and having them comfortable with it. So if a couple gets divorced and there are frozen embryos, and one of them takes responsibility for them, or takes them in the divorce, I don't know what the right terminology would be, or has ownership of it. Well, what does that mean to the other? Does it mean that they are a participating parent in this, or does it mean that they will be a parent that is not really involved? So we want to be sure that that child grows up to be an adult, and as an adult, that person is comfortable, and they're comfortable in either finding out how they were conceived, who their biological connection is, or parent is, whatever or donor is, and making sure that the medical community, the legal community, and every other professional community that touches them is able to address it in their own way. So
Absolutely. I actually, you say that I have that exact fact pattern going on in a matter that I'm handling now, which is, former spouses. They have two children together, and they have frozen embryos. This is not an acrimonious situation. They're not fighting over who can use them and what's going to happen when they do. But one of them does not want to have children, the other does. And so what we're able to do in New York now is essentially treat one as a donor and the other as an intended parent. But like you pointed out, this child will grow up with siblings, and the siblings were conceived during the marriage, right? And so, what's that child's narrative going to be? How is it going to work in terms of visits, decision making, child support? All of these things are intertwined in consideration.
they are, they are. It's a lot that you're undertaking by opening up the conversation. But I have to thank you, so because it's so wonderful to open it up now and to make sure that it's in place prior to the marriage not continuing than it is after, and then you have these embryos and you don't know what to do with them, or sperm or egg.
Well, look, that's why you and people are in your position are so integral to the process. I always start my conversation with clients like, have we talked to a therapist? Have we sat through counseling? Have we thought through every, even God forbid scenario, and how we might feel in that before we move forward? And I think it's really important to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much for the information. I think it's great. There's such a synergy going on here in terms of just opening up conversation and making sure that people are able to be able to identify what needs to be done, right? And able to talk about frozen embryo and frozen sperm and frozen eggs, and have professionals become comfortable in the conversation. And
Right.
the more we have this on forums, the more the rest of the population who is not really touched by it sees it,
True.
the more they become comfortable with it.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really, really great. And congratulations on your children, because when you went through this, there's been so many changes over the years since you had your children.
Yep.
You
Yep.
were a trailblazer in many ways.
Well, the emotions are the same, whether then or now. And yeah, thank you. The outcome is miraculous. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're doing now to help people who have been on the same journey is really a wonderful thing. It's a gift.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Thank you for being on today. I really
All right.
appreciate it. I think it's so much information, and people who weren't able to listen now will be able to listen later. And that'll be great because I think you shared a lot of information. So I appreciate your time.
Perfect. So let's be in touch soon. We'll do more things.
Yeah, I would love to. I would
Great.
love to. Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, bye bye.